We are live, and this is Grover Norquist with Leave Us Alone with Grover Norquist, where every week we talk about an issue about how the government could be leaving us alone to run our own lives, but has chosen not to, either some different level of annoyance. We're going to be joined today by James Bovard. I simply want to remind everybody that the Leave Us Alone is both a video and an audio podcast. If you like what you see and hear, be sure to like and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to Americans for Tax Reform on YouTube. Hitting the thumbs up button would be greatly appreciated, and your engagement with the show helps more people to learn about it. If you're more into audio podcasts, you can Leave Us Alone with Grover Norquist on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Please be sure to like and leave a review. The better the reviews, the more people are able to find the show. Today I'm wearing my Thank You for Leaving Me Alone t-shirt, which I've been wearing around the office since we don't have to wear ties these days. And staff reminded me that perhaps it would be appropriate apparel for the Leave Us Alone show. And speaking of appropriate, James Bovard, who has been a longtime writer and activist and thinker on liberty issues and ways the government could be a little less annoying in our lives. He has written extensively about the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, and some of the ways that politicians have used the IRS to go after Americans, both politicians, people who support politicians, businessmen and women, and simply individuals who somebody didn't like, not to raise money, but to harass them. And since the government is now talking about, the Biden administration now talks about wanting to spend $80 billion to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. Perhaps we ought to think about what those agents have done in the past, how they've been used, and why this administration might want to do just that. James Bovard, could you introduce yourself to people as you would like to be introduced?
Well, hey, I'm sorry that I didn't know the T-shirt rule today. I had some good T-shirts from gun shows I could have worn, but instead I was trying to be respectful, so I went with seersucker, and I didn't even wear my railroad engineer cap. So that's kind of my trademark for podcasts. But I figure if I'm going on with the Grover, I need to look respectable. So better late than never.
I'll be respectable next week.
That's right. Yeah, well, there's a statute of limitation on that. I'm a journalist. I've been writing a Washington journalist for over 30 years. I've done, 10 books walking through a lot of the government atrocities. Grover said that, I write about how government could be a little bit less annoying. I guess Louis Freeh didn't see it quite like that. One of the funny things I list in my bio is a number of federal agency chieftains who have publicly condemned my work.
How many?
A dozen. Starting with Louis Freeh, the FBI chief.
What was his objection?
I was writing about Ruby Ridge, about how the FBI was covering up how an FBI sniper gunned down Vicki Weaver as she was standing at her cabin door holding her baby at Ruby Ridge. Yeah. And the FBI had a huge cover up on that. And I wrote a story for the Wall Street Journal that said that, look, the FBI, to say it was an accident, that's not what the FBI said at first. They first said that the killing of Vicki Weaver was justified. Then they later said, whoops, after a backlash. There were so many details that they covered up. As far as the rules of engagement, that the FBI snipers could shoot practically any adult they saw, which the federal court said was completely unconstitutional. But Freeh objected to that and, basically carped at me in the Wall Street Journal and Washington Times. But I managed to get hold of a confidential Justice Department report, 500-page report, that walked through everything he said that blew it to pieces. So, that really hurt my faith in the FBI.
Well, didn't Arlen Specter have a Senate report on Ruby Ridge as well?
Arlen Specter did great work on Ruby Ridge. He showed a lot of courage on that. He was one of the members, a few people on Capitol Hill who paid attention to it. And there was Helen Chenoweth did great work from Idaho. But, Specter was from Pennsylvania, but Specter stood up. I think he recognized the due process issues, the government out of control, and he was very impressive. Much of what he did otherwise, I completely oppose. but he deserves credit on that.
He asked to come to the Wednesday meeting where we put together a coalition of people, now 160 people each week, people who basically would like to have more freedom in their lives. And our inspector said, could I come over and talk to everyone? I just did this study on Ruby Ridge. And sometimes he wasn't always on the side of expanding liberty, but he knew he was on this one, and he wanted to come and bask in this moment where he'd done something particularly brave.
Well, I certainly hope that nobody rudely asked him about the magic bullet that killed JFK.
No, everybody was very, very cheerful. Talk to us about what should people remember, or if maybe they never knew it, what should they know that they hadn't been told about how presidents, politicians, IRS heads have used the IRS to harass citizens for political reasons?
Yeah, well, this is a pattern that goes back to the 1920s.
1920s. This didn't start with Trump or John F. Kennedy?
No. It's you can't trust the press corps to tell you something started before Trump, but it did. There was a senator who was planning to investigate the IRS, and the IRS dropped a hammer on him, I think, on the Senate floor, hitting him with the bill for taxes and harassing him. Franklin Roosevelt was very aggressive in using the IRS to go after his opponents, like Huey Long and some of the big businesses. John F. Kennedy took it to a higher level, very, very aggressive, and going after right-wing talk radio. President Johnson, of course, well,
that was I thought he used the FCC to go after conservative radio shows. The IRS against the people themselves?
Yeah, my impression was the IRS joined that party. So President Nixon was super aggressive on this. That was one of the items the House Judiciary Committee mentioned when his impeachment articles, I think, if memory serves. But there were a lot of details that came out. COINTELPRO, COINTELPRO was FBI, but Senator Church's investigation of government civil liberties abuses in the mid-1970s had a lot of stuff on the FBI, a lot of stuff on the IRS going wild against people who the government didn't like, especially Nixon.
That's in the Church report?
Yeah, there were like 4 or 5 different parts of the Church Committee report, and the stuff on the IRS was excellent. Almost nobody recalls it.
Okay. And
then you flip forward a few decades to President Clinton. There was a report the White House came out with about the stream of conspiracy commerce or something like that in 1995. And that basically launched a lot of vendetta audits of right-wing targets, conservative targets, people that had criticized Bill Clinton, folks, people, Landmark Legal Foundation, I think was one of the targets. Heritage Foundation, I think was one of the targets. And there was a lot of hubbub on that, but the media tend to brush it under the rug. There was a fascinating report in 1999 by John Solomon when he was writing for the AP that talked about how members of Congress could personally ask or personally tell the IRS who to audit. And it wasn't just conservatives, it was both parties were doing this. And so you had this basic...
A congressman could call the IRS and say, I want you to do an audit on this person or this organization or this company, and the IRS has to do it, or they just...
IRS doesn't have to do it, but the IRS takes it under advisement. And oh, by the way, the congressman might have control over the IRS's budget. So there's a level of leverage there. This is something which came up again during the Obama era, when the Obama IRS was going after a lot of conservatives and conservative organizations. David Keating's group, was it now the Institute for Free Speech? I think it had a different name back then, but it filed a complaint with the Senate Ethics Committee about how members of the Senate were telling the IRS who to audit. The Senate Ethics Committee looked at the complaint and brushed it off and basically said senators have a right to do that. And this is a level of arbitrary power that's absolutely chilling.
I served on the Commission on Restructuring the IRS, which was put together in the wake of Roth's investigation into some of these issues under the Clinton years, when Clinton was president. And we interviewed the head of the IRS, the commission, Senator Kerry of Nebraska, and Portman of Ohio, Congressman Portman of Ohio, were the two chairmen of our congressional committee. And I asked the head of the IRS, I said, I've talked to my conservative friends, Heritage, Citizens Against Government Waste, National Rifle Association. A lot of them are being audited. And I talked to my left-wing friends and say, are they doing just a lot of audits? And nobody on the left was being audited. And I asked the head of the IRS how that could be. And he said, we've got this algorithm that's completely fair, independent.
Oh, yeah.
Almost like a computer program. You put it in. And I said, that's great. Could we see it?
Oh, that's great.
Oh, no, it's secret. You'll have to trust us.
Wow.
That's our tough investigation. Oh, by the way, Senator Bob Kerry of Nebraska. I think we've exhausted this question now. Could we move on?
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, if memory serves, he was on the 9/11 Commission when there was some great truth tellers on that one. So, talk about taking a dive. Yeah, it's fascinating to see the lack of curiosity in Washington by the media, most of the media, on this type of abuse, because there are so many individual cases of the IRS, targeting people questionably, and yet we're supposed to assume that there's no pattern, and it's like, it doesn't pass the laugh test.
Now, who was FDR going after, and did when he went after that Louisiana governor, did that end up in a criminal thing, or was it? I mean, if you have the IRS audit somebody, it can cost them tens of thousands of dollars just to go get somebody to help you go through your papers.
I'm not sure how that worked out. Maybe Huey Long was assassinated before the audit was completed. I don't know. He also went after Father Coughlin, who was, I love nasty ideas, but you kind of don't want the IRS to be able to pick on radio hosts who upset the president. But it's interesting. With a part of my concern on the IRS right now is you have Biden pushing for a vast expansion in the budget and in the amount of agents, and pressuring them to get as much money as they can. At the same time, the Biden administration is talking about practically anybody who is pro-gun and pro-freedom as potentially being a domestic extremist or an insurrectionist or whatever. So it seems as if the Biden administration is broadening the definition of public enemy. At the same time, they're unleashing the IRS.
Well, you had that under Clinton, where they were arguing that the guy who blew up Oklahoma was, by their definition, right-wing, and that we had to go after conservative extremism because of that. And anybody who owned too many guns tended to fall into that category. And the one number that jumped at me, tell me if I'm missing something, was that in the 3 years under Obama, following the creation of the Tea Party movement, there only one conservative group that was looking to become incorporated and get a tax status and be able to raise money was allowed. So there were hundreds, maybe thousands of little Tea Party groups around the country that never incorporated and never got to have a bank account and or to be audited. You couldn't raise money enough to hire half a staff person if you can't incorporate and get a C3 status and be tax deductible, or tax exempt. And that was it was the death of the Tea Party movement. It just never got organized, never grew beyond this original outburst of concern about all the spending and taxes. And then, what structure was created during the Tea Party movement that still exists? The taxpayer movement, things in 1978, Howard Jarvis in California, Citizens for Limited Taxation in Massachusetts. These groups still list, still around 40 years later, because they could incorporate and raise money and so on. Tea Party was scattered to the winds by the Internal Revenue Service. Wow, that's an interesting story. I'd heard about how the Obama IRS went after the Tea Party folks with a much higher rate of audits, and I think one of the reports said that 10% of their donors were audited, a rate that was 10 times higher than the audit rate for other Americans. But I wasn't aware of how the IRS blocking getting nonprofit status was a huge barrier for the expansion of the Tea Party. So, but the lawyers who you generally go to say, I need to incorporate, can you send in the paperwork? And it would, happen quickly because it was pro forma. Those guys found that all of their Tea Party related things were just languishing for years.
Wow.
And so you could reverse engineer to figure out what happened. And of course, when people started talking to each other, they said, yeah, my request also.
Yeah, well, there are so many levels of BS on this. One of the things I've written about is how the Freedom of Information Act has become a complete charade. The federal government is classifying trillions of pages of documents as secrets every year. And, the Freedom of Information Act was supposed to assure that the government responds, it's democratic, self-government, yada, yada. But it's turned into a complete charade, and it was made a lot worse under Obama because President Obama, his White House said that any FOIA request that had White House equities had to be circled through the White House. And so you had all these sensitive requests that were delayed for years, and not just in the IRS, but for a lot of other federal agencies. It was a complete sham. It's been almost completely ignored by the media.
Is that legal, what they did, or just?
No, it's done by the White House. I mean, is it legal? That's funny.
Well, Nixon said if the president did it, it's legal.
Well, it seems that way. No, I wrote about this for a USA Today piece a couple of years ago. But it was something which was kept almost totally secret for several years, and then it kind of leaked out. And I think Politico had a piece in maybe 2014 on this. But it was a huge logjam for FOIA at the same time that Obama is being treated like a saint for restoring open government after the George Bush era.
Yeah. Couple of things. If people want to send in a question, be sure and do that. And if you want to, you can tweet at me at Grover Norquist. We'll try and get to we'll try and answer them on Twitter or Instagram, or if we can get to them during the show, we'll do that too. But address them during the, we'll try and address them during the show if you send them in through the comments line. If not, we'll get back to you on Twitter and Instagram, or even in a future program. So questions, comments, most welcome. I had read in one place that between when Richard Nixon lost the governorship in '60 and then was elected president in '68, that he was audited every single year. Is that?
It was '62 when he lost the governorship.
Oh, I'm sorry. The presidency. That he lost the presidency.
The presidency, yeah, okay.
And that he was audited each year, which might have given him the idea that presidents are allowed to do this.
Well, it's certainly possible that happened to him. I mean, I assume he was a high-income group, and there was a much higher rate of audits in general back then. It's interesting to see how the whole issue of audits has become an issue of politics, because there should be other issues, and a huge one is that the tax law is so vague, if not contradictory, that the IRS can target almost anybody at once. And it was the case, at least as of a decade or so ago, that if an IRS auditor wanted to attribute income to you, that was presumed correct. And you would have to go to the tax court or wherever to fight the imaginary income the auditor said that you had. Another thing is that people can get sent to prison for lying to the government. It's Title 18, Statute 101, to 3 years, 5 years. But if an IRS agent, falsely attributes extra income to you, that instead of being sent to prison, he gets a bonus. There was some of the numbers I saw a couple decades ago when people challenged audit assessments, about 2/3 of them were dismissed by the tax court. And that's symptomatic of how a vast number of innocent people were getting falsely charged with extra income during audits.
That history of the IRS assuming or asserting that you made more money than you did, and then when they go to court and they look at it, 2/3 of the time they find the IRS had it wrong, is particularly important, given that there's an entire movement in this country that Elizabeth Warren supports. She didn't invent it. It's been around for a while. That we should do what some other countries do, which is have the IRS know all of your data and all of your information, so you have no economic privacy. Then they do your tax reform for you, okay? Now, for some people, if you have one job and a couple of deductions, it's pretty simple. But for independent contractors, who have hundreds, if not thousands, if you're Uber or something, hundreds, not thousands of interactions, or people who have 2 or 3 jobs and or savings, it can get a little complicated. And for the IRS to have to know everything about you in order to do your taxes for you, then if they get it wrong, you've got to go argue with City Hall. So instead of starting from what you understand it to be, you start from what some bureaucrat thinks you owe and thinks you made. And whenever this has been put forward in California or Britain as an idea, they give you they go, here's the financial impact of this. And the financial impact is the government expects to make a lot more money. When California said, we'll do everybody's taxes, and if we did that, we'd have hundreds of millions of dollars more because we would be sending out bigger bills than you think we should. Same thing in Britain. It's viewed as a way to raise taxes, among other reasons. That, let's say they charged you $1,000 too much. You're going to hire a lawyer for $10,000 to go argue about the $1,000. This is what happens with civil asset forfeiture when a cop takes your car or the money in your back pocket says he thinks it's related to drugs. If it's $1,000 or $2,000, do you really go to court to get it back? How much would you pay a lawyer?
Yeah, well, Senator Warner's scheme sound like her scheme sound like a way to boost the sale of Bitcoin, because folks would be doing everything they can to dodge it. It's an interesting thing on the independent contractors. I've been an independent contractor basically my whole adult life. And the IRS has repeatedly tried to just crucify independent contractors and drive them out of business because it's a nuisance for the IRS to track their income. So they're basically trying to force everyone to become an employee and sacrifice their own independence. Biden has pushed some ideas on this that are absolutely chilling. The state of California has gone completely bat crazy on this. So where does it end?
Well, Jim, the state of California and Biden are the same thing. What California's legislature did was they passed basically a ban on being an independent contractor. They said you can't do these things and be an independent contractor, which covered every Uber driver, every Lyft driver, people who write newspaper articles for five different newspapers or scripts for different studios in Hollywood. Lots of people many people, they don't have one boss. They have dozens or hundreds or 7 people they work with and do work for, right? It's not your boss, it's somebody you contract with.
Yep.
But there are 2 groups that don't like that. You've got the unions, because if you're an independent contractor, you don't have a boss, you're not an employee, you're an independent contractor, you're self-employed, can't be made to join a union. That sucks. And you can't pay union dues, which sucks even worse. But the other one is, it is tougher for the IRS in that they have to deal with you as an individual instead of dealing with General Motors, who hands all your financial data to General Motors employees for tens of thousands of them all at one time. So much easier for the IRS to get memos from a mega corporation than a small business or a self-employed person. And unions like it because then you can be forced to have a boss, get unionized, pay dues, that cool stuff. And politicians who owe their livelihood to the unions in California passed a law basically banning most independent contractors. The people of California put a measure on the ballot this last November, the same election where Biden defeated Trump by a lot. Biden's policy, because he wants to take what California did nationally, he has endorsed something called the PRO Act, P-R-O Act, which includes a ban on most independent contractors. So California, blue state, voted down the ban on independent contractors same day that they voted for Biden. So they weren't voting for Biden because he was for banning independent contractors, quite the opposite. And now Biden goes, that's fine. California doesn't like them, screw them. We're going to do this nationally and impose it nationally. And there's no initiative process nationally. So that is a big part of what the Biden administration's labor policy is, the ban on independent contractors, helps the IRS, also the union bosses.
Yeah, and it's symptomatic. I mean, the people pushing this policy don't give a damn about personal independence. I mean, this is a tax issue. It's also an independence issue. I mean, for instance, as a writer, there's sometimes a story which I write that the first editor I show it to says, it's not quite for us. It's, you're a little bit overheated there. So I say, all right, I'll find some fire-breathing libertarian editor. I'll move the story down the road. And if I'm working for a single editor, it's like, he's the gatekeeper of my thoughts that go public, and it's like, So,
I hadn't thought of that. It's a gatekeeper not just for contracts, but for your writing.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of writers I've seen in California raising hell over this. It's interesting because it might be the people making the policy assume that the bosses are intelligent and have got good judgment. There are a lot of editors they haven't dealt with. So, not that I'm bitter.
Okay, Jim, this has been fascinating. And I think with an administration that wants to put $80 billion more into hiring more people to work at the IRS, the report that came out recently that 40% of the copying machines at the IRS don't work.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Because people forgot to clean it out or to replace the copying material, the powder that they use for copying.
So here's a question. 40% of the copy machines don't work. How many of the employees work?
When I first came to DC, I worked for a private group, the National Taxpayers Union.
Sure.
And we called in, great group. We called in the fact that the Xerox machine wasn't working, or it may not be Xerox, but the equivalent of Xerox, the copying machine wasn't working. And the guy calls and said, "Are you a government agency?" And we said, "No, we're a private sector." "We'll be there today." I said,
that's great.
"What's the distinction?" I said, "Well, we got lots of the government agencies with requests in to fix it, but they don't care. So we'll get to them when we get to them. They're just as happy. But you're the private sector. You have to do, you have, what is it, the Ghostbusters movie? You have to produce results. So you need your copier. The government, they never call and harass us for not showing up on time. They also don't know how to change how to clean out the copying machine. Just the kind of stuff that you and I are supposed to do with our own copying machines.
Something that we better learn. So,
Yes, or your copier doesn't work. But Jim Bovard, thank you for joining Leave Us Alone with Grover Norquist today. And a reminder that Leave Us Alone is both a video and an audio podcast. If you like what you see and hear, be sure to like and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to Americans for Tax Reform on YouTube. Hitting the thumbs up button would be greatly appreciated, and your engagement with the show helps more people learn about what we're doing here at Leave Us Alone with Grover Norquist. If you're more into audio podcasts, you can have Leave Us Alone with Grover Norquist on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please be sure to like and leave a review. The better the reviews, the more people are able to see the show. This is Grover Norquist with the Leave Us Alone with Grover Norquist, talking to Jim Bovard about our friends at the IRS and how politicians have used it as a political weapon over the years. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.